Welcome to the Made for Agriculture podcast with Adam, Cameron, and Emily. Today's hosts are Adam Jones and Cameron Horan.
All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the Made for Agriculture podcast. My name's Adam Jones.
And I'm Cameron Horan.
Welcome back, everyone. This morning, we are on one of our last three in-season podcasts for 2024. We wanted to jump on here this morning and go through some of the emerging, we called it emerging diseases, but we want to go through some of the things that these guys have seen in the field this year, things that have popped up and been more or as much of an issue as we've had in the past. Some things that we've learned from 2024, and just going over some of the things that kind of in-field symptomology, things that you're going to see in the field driving around right now during this fall. So we'll kind of jump right into it today. We've got a few diseases that we want to get through. We're going to talk about red crown rot. We're going to talk about phytophthora. We're going to talk about sudden death syndrome in soybeans, and then we're going to also talk about tar spot. So those are kind of the diseases that we're going to try to get through today, and we feel like we've learned some things that are worth sharing for 2025 and beyond. So I'm going to share my screen so those of you watching on YouTube can see some photos of some of these diseases as the guys kind of describe what's going on out there in the field. So we're going to start with red crown rot. So if any one of you guys wants to go ahead and take off with kind of a description of where it came from, what we're seeing in the field, those kind of things right now, I'll throw some pictures up.
Kevin, it started up in your area, at least in Missouri, so take it away.
Yeah, we did. There was some identified in northeast Missouri. It seems like it's been kind of contained. It is, it's another soil disease. We'll be talking about sudden death syndrome here a little later, I'm sure, but foliar symptoms are fairly similar to sudden death syndrome. But as we've talked about the past several years with sudden death syndrome, it does infect the beans around planting time, but with sudden death syndrome, it likes cool and wet conditions around planting. With red crown rot, it seems like warm and wet conditions. So this could be something where we might see sudden death syndrome on some earlier planted beans, or in red crown rot on some later planted beans. But moisture is a factor on both of those diseases, but soil temperature is what the variable is there. With it being soil borne, the red crown rot, it's going to we've got to have some soil movement from one field to another for it to spread. So this is going to be something that might spread with equipment. Might get some dirt on some tires in one field and move that to the next field. The red crown rot, which here, this photo here that's up, there are some red structures on the base of the stem, which that's going to be kind of the dead giveaway on red crown rot. Yeah, there we go. They're kind of hard to see, and not all plants with red crown rot will have those, but when we do see those, that is kind of the for sure identifying factor. I cannot remember off the top of my head what those structures are called, so if anybody happens to know the scientific name of those, please chime in. But that's kind of the quick rundown on the red crown rot. Something with it being new, it's something we're still learning quite a bit about. But
yeah, Kevin, a lot of those structures on the base of the stem are a big deal because foliar wise, I mean, you saw for those of you that can see on YouTube, I mean, the leaf structure from the drive-by scenario looks nearly exactly like SDS. I think that's what it would be very, very easily falsely diagnosed as.
Yeah, and same with, as we've seen in the past, brown stem rot, the foliar symptoms look just like SDS. There's a lot of, which we'd be talking about phytophthora also, the foliar symptoms there can be similar sometimes. So we don't want to look at leaves alone on anymore on a lot of these foliar diseases. There's just so many of them that can have a similar look to them. So we've got to get out there and look a little closer before we try to diagnose anything.
Absolutely. And you guys are really good about discussing sending things to the lab at the university and those kind of things. I think this is why, folks, just because a lot of these diseases, like I said, from a drive-by scouting scenario, from even walking a field and just looking at leaf symptoms, look very, very, very similar. So some of those lab confirmations of what's actually out there is important, especially from a management scenario. So I guess with that transition, Kevin or Scott, I mean, what do you guys? What's our management for this disease? I guess number one is going to be diagnosis. Obviously, let's if you've got something that looks like SDS, let's get out there and take a look scouting wise this time of year, right? And confirm what we actually have.
Part of it, but I guess unfortunately, I think like the field up north, we went up there and took a look at it, and Parathecia are the little fruiting bodies, but that we were talking about, and they were showing up everywhere. I mean, every plant we pulled up, the plants. This is actually an image of that field, or in the field, and I appreciate the people that were involved in that letting us know where it was so we could go look at it. By the way, took a couple of my folks up to look at it. I guess when we talk about sudden, this is one field I've seen, so just take all of this with a big grain of salt. I walked into the field expecting to see, all I heard about was that it looked very much like sudden death. And what we saw basically was what you're seeing in this image. Just, the plants had already wilted down, were dying. There were plants that had the foliar sudden death-like symptoms, but I had to look for them at that point. Like, I had to really go around the margins of these areas and kind of get down into the canopy and to find, for example, the picture I took. That was not the first tell, at least walking up there. Now, what it looked like a month prior to that, obviously, I don't know. But it was almost, I guess, the appearance as I've received some other pictures of kind of advanced, from a distance type pictures of advanced phytophthora or even some brown stem rot that was pretty severe. My first thing to the folks sending me the pictures was look at the stems, look at the roots, see if you can find any of those fruiting bodies. So that was just one thing that was pretty dramatic to me. Often, even as we get later in the season, it seems like, for example, with sudden death, we're still seeing a lot of upright plants with the foliar symptoms, and that was not the case, at least what we saw there. The other thing is Kevin pointed out, with it being soil-borne, talking to some of the folks that are seeing this over in Illinois, it is very common to be in a very compact area. Again, anecdotal, this is what I'm being told, but to be in a very compact area where the disease is present and for it to really follow growers. It's in this field, it's in this field, it's not in this field, it's not in this field. And it's matching up to where equipment is being ran through and that kind of thing. So, having said that, I think I'm sitting in Mexico, Missouri right now. The field that's up in Kevin's area is about an hour and 10, 15 minutes north of us. But it was also just found here in Audrain County in the last week. Where exactly, I'm not sure yet. But it's been confirmed by the lab. So, I can't imagine it's not somewhere in between those two fields as well and kind of scattered around. So.
Yeah, that's a good call out with these. I mean, obviously we don't get great, immediate detection of some of these diseases. And when they pop up, it's a lot of times in somebody's field who's paying attention or a field that's being scouted. And that's a pretty good thought that it's probably somewhere else in between as well. We saw that with a lot of things that popped up, tar spot, a lot of those things. They show up where you look for them, and we can assume that they're probably in between as well.
I think the lab is going to be important on some of these. I've got one of my guys that teases me in front of everybody else, don't ask Wilbur, he'll just tell you to take it to the lab. As with most things that are kind of funny, there is a degree of truth to that. There's only so much we can do on the tailgate. I do like the lab, and part of that, I guess, maybe is just proximity for me. It's pretty handy, and they do a great job down there, and I'm through Columbia all the time, so it's, again, handy. But it sounds like on the earlier stages, when you are maybe getting those foliar symptoms, and again, this is talking to folks over in Illinois, and then even some of our, our crop protection partners that have spent some time over in some of those fields in Illinois, finding fields where it has been confirmed, but you are not seeing the red fruiting bodies. There really are no tells, at least earlier in the season. Now, a little bit of this, I think, if you get some moisture later on and you follow those fields all the way through, I'm thinking that as you get later, a lot of times those will appear. And it's not like if you catch it early, there's something we can do. It's very, very going to be very similar to sudden death and brown stem rot in that regard. You're gonna note it. You're gonna be able to plan for future management and that kind of thing. But it's not like you can race in with a rescue. But just know as you're finding earlier fields, the thing for us has always been, I guess where I'm getting at, if you find the sudden death symptoms, we always split the plant to make sure it's not brown stem rot. And I probably did that for 15 years plus before I ever finally found stem rot, but it was just kind of your standard operating procedure. You find sudden death, you split it just to be sure. I can tell you, I remember the first time it is brown stem rot. It was kind of like a banner day. But now, if we're confirming, okay, it's not brown stem rot, we think it's sudden death, I don't know that we can go with that now. Even, we do want to inspect the bottom, see if it does give itself away that it is red crown rot. But if it's earlier and if we were in a period of where it's dry, we may not be seeing those. So, like they say, we're going to say send it to the lab, and we don't want to bombard them with 1,000 sudden death, plants, but we are probably going to need to use them more to kind of confirm this, especially in these areas where we think, we're maybe on the front end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so from a management scenario, kind of what I've pulled out of here is, we definitely want to, one of the reasons to diagnose is then we can understand that soil movement and how we treat our equipment from field to one field to another. Also, I've heard some rumbling of some, treatment type scenarios if we got somebody that has this, but I know it is fairly new and a lot of the crop protection companies haven't had a lot of chance to look at this. So you guys got anything? I've heard, I think a 2X rated Saltro is what I've heard kicked around. Anything else that I know that's a fairly costly treatment for this disease, but if you have it, you have it. Anything else you guys have heard on treatment or management of this?
I would just say that there's not going to be any kind of a rescue treatment. This is it's similar to sudden death, that it infects the plant early, right around planting time, early in the season. When you see foliar symptoms, it also, like sudden death, the fungus lays dormant in the roots and it lets a toxin out, and that's what starts what you're seeing in the leaves. So the fungus isn't actually in the leaves in either one of those diseases. When you see those symptoms, it's in the roots, and that's just that's the symptoms of the toxin that it lets out and goes through the plant there. So it's not going to be something we can spray for anything. It'll be early season management. Yeah, you mentioned seed treatments. I think there's going to have to be a little work done for figure out what's going to work on that. With this being new, we don't have a whole lot of answers yet, but there'll be a lot of early season management that goes into prevention.
Yep. No, that's a great call out, Kevin.
One thing, Adam, just on this, this is me being a little bit pedantic, so big surprise there. This is, as Kevin said, it's new. It's new to us. It's been around. It's, tar spot. We'll talk about that a little later. It's really new, at least in, in the United States. But tar spot or red crown rot has been around, but it's been more down south. It was, I guess it was just about the same time that tar spot came on up here that it was discovered. So for all intent and purposes, it is new. We have no idea we don't have a lot of experience how it's not only this far north how it's behaved, but when you get on certain soils and everything, and it'll be interesting. I mean, for example, this one that was found in Audrain County, you know, if it's anything like what we see with sudden death, we're going to have to get some experience with it to know what's going to happen. When you fire up an irrigator, for example, and then showing up in some of the spots where, water stands, on the flat and those kind of things. We know the pathogen. There's quite a bit of information on the pathogen, but not on, what we've got the host, we've got the, we'll have the, we've got the pathogen, and then seeing how it fits exactly on our soils and with our other management, it's gonna be a steep learning curve, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I agree. Those are all good points. Let's go ahead and bounce on. Shannon, we didn't pick on you with red crown rot, but I'm going to pick on you now. Phytophthora is not a new disease by any means, but it is something that we've seen pop up throughout the season this year. Again, there's nothing really we can do foliar-wise, but why don't you kind of walk us through what we've seen this year from a Phytophthora standpoint and causes and management and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so on Phytophthora, we've seen not as much early season Phytophthora, but we've seen a lot more late season Phytophthora this year. I think Kevin mentioned when we were discussing topics, I think he mentioned it too. He's been seeing in his area. So Phytophthora is nothing new. Typically when we're talking seed treatments, the reason why we're talking seed treatments is Phytophthora. It's one of the seedling diseases. Typically, if we're talking about the seedling side of it, we normally call it dampening off. We'll see beans emerge and then they slowly die back, and Phytophthora is generally a cause for that. But what we're seeing this year is quite a bit of late season Phytophthora. Typically, this is going to show up if we have some heavy rains, if we have ponding in the fields, low-lying areas, which I believe this is one of the pictures that I took, and that's kind of the scenario. This is right along the road edge, right where we get a lot of runoff from the road, and some water ponded shortly after emergence, and we're seeing this late season death, kind of similar to maybe like a sudden death, or we just talked about brown stem rot or brown crown rot. Which one is what's the disease? So it's kind of going through the same things. We got to cut open the stems, look at our pith, look at our our foliar symptomology, what's going on, digging up the roots. I'll be honest, this one kind of had my head scratching. I think I called Kevin and Scott both on this one because it kind of had some symptoms of some sudden death. It kind of had some symptoms of brown stem rot. We're looking pretty hard for the red crown rot, but those guys' help and some little agronomists, we dug down, and it came back to be Phytophthora in this particular field. The general best management practices is going to be a seed treatment early. There's not going to be any post-rescue. There's nothing we can go in now to keep it from spreading. If the plants are infected, they're infected, and they're going to have to go out their course. The particular thing in this field, even the healthy the plants that looked healthy, as we started cutting open more stems and more stems, you see the foliar there is green still. We were fighting damage, even beyond the point of even the plants that were just dying off. So yield impact from that standpoint is definitely going to be impacted.
No doubt. A lot of what I've seen is just kind of stand loss throughout the year from those early infections. You'll just kind of be walking along and you can't notice it from 10,000 feet away, but you get out there and start walking and, every 100 plants or so, there's one that's dead or dying. But I guess with Phytophthora, having it been around a little bit longer, and I'm certainly not the one that can speak from a great deal of experience on this, but we do have some variety resistance that is in there on this one versus something like red crown rot that is just kind of newer to the soybean breeding world. But there are some genes that show some Phytophthora resistance that are in different varieties. So if you've got a field with kind of a known history, that's something worth looking at from a variety tolerance.
I'm glad you brought that up, Adam. I was gonna mention there's two things to look at when you're making your seed decisions on what varieties you're going to plant. There's going to be the phytophthora genes or the tolerance to, different strains of phytophthora. And then there's also going to be a rating for field tolerance. So those genes are only going to be, but it's good to have them because they are good on certain races of Phytophthora, but not all of them. So that field tolerance rating, that's going to be your really important number to look at. You want to see a very high rating on the field tolerance, because that is the rating is that disease as a whole, regardless of what strains you might have in the field, because so keep that in mind when you're making those decisions.
Yeah, it's a great point. Great point. I mean, as far as yield versus some of these disease and agronomic packages is going to depend on what your local conditions are. So this is why we always say that plot data is plot data, and you kind of look at it, and it doesn't always directly apply to everybody's field, and that this is a great example of that. If you got a field with a high disease load of Phytophthora or sudden death or something like that, that exists in your soil, then we've got to manage that, no matter what agronomic package that may have looked best in some plot that was 60 miles away.
Okay, let's real quick, is the environment kind of, I think, as it was alluded to, has a big thing to play in this as well. Probably the best example, and I've shared this in some other places before, but we had a field a few years back, and it was a large field, so this was kind of interesting to watch. It was several hundred acres, but one of Kevin's folks up north was an intern at the time, Sophia Short, and we were keeping an eye on this field, and ended up making the call that we needed a replant just because heavy rains and, again, a relatively flat field. So they came back in and replanted at an angle just right through the existing stand with the same variety and everything. And then as we got later in the year, and it was late all the way August, and I think we were still even finding some in September, every time we came back to the field after a certain point, we confirmed Phytophthora earlier with some disease, but then we kept finding it again on throughout the season. It was always in the first stand, because you could tell because the way they'd planted it in at an angle. It was the same variety, same ground, same everything. We kept seeing it all the way through, but it was always in that original stand where you'd had that environmental factor early on.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and that's what I was talking about as far as you can see it seems like throughout the season with just random plants dying off. All right, guys, let's move on. I know you don't have as many photos of this, but let's hit on sudden death real quick. I guess before we kind of get into this, and I turn it over to one of you guys to describe what happens here, and I know we have before, so I'm sure we could probably make it quick. Some of these soil-borne soybean diseases, I think, are going to be more of an issue moving forward. And I guess the reason I thought of this with sudden death is we've got more guys pushing planting date earlier and earlier, and that seems to make us more vulnerable to some of these disease infestations from what I've seen in the field. Those are the ones that you can see these driving by, things like that late in the season. Part of that yield impact is from having that plant being there, respirating, being in that field longer, right? We want those longer growing seasons so that plant can produce more energy and put more into yield. So that does, make us more susceptible to some of these diseases. I guess sudden death is a good example of that. So I'll let one of you guys jump in. We haven't picked on Jesse yet, but you or Scott maybe can jump in and kind of give us a kind of a quick intro on sudden death, and I'll show a photo for those that are watching on YouTube what the leaf symptomology looks like.
Well, I guess I'll chime in since you're picking on me.
I am. Sorry, buddy.
Sudden death, there's two things: cool and wet at planting, and then also the cyst nematode part of it. So first is just understanding where it's coming from. Is it in the soil? And I can't say it's Fusarium, but I can't say the second part of that. So if somebody wants to chime in, go ahead. But once you figure out where it's coming from, then you can kind of understand. I mean, a seed treatment is still the best option, but understanding, is it cyst nematode that's opening a place for that bacteria to get in, or is it straight from the bacteria from cold, wet soils? So that's just the big thing. And then really all we got is seed treatments. And of course, this infects early, but you don't see the symptoms till late, usually late reproductive stages. If it's a real bad year, you'll start seeing it at like R2, R3. If it ain't as bad, it won't show up till like R5, R6. So seed treatments like Saltro is probably the one we've seen the best. There is a Levo out there too. The Levo, you can get some of that hailing early. But at the same time, if you got bad sudden death, the biggest thing is just make sure you treat them. And we talk about planting time on all these. And something I noticed this year is we planted a bunch of beans down here in March when it was still dry. So when you think March, Adam said it, well, normally we're cool and wet that time. This year we were not. We were cool, but we were not wet. So majority of our beans planted in March, 1st April had no sudden death. But we get to that second week of April when we started getting some rains and stayed cool. That's where we seen a lot of this show up this year. So keep that in mind. I mean, I know we have a hard enough time predicting rainfall, but if you're going to plant early, try to plant in a spell where it looks like it may be dry, or understand like, hey, okay, it's going to be wet, it's going to be cool right after they plant this, and take time to look for soybeans that are good with SDS if they got it, whether it's assistant nematode protection in the variety, and then also a seed treatment. Like they are just, for my small piece Missouri guy who keeps things simple, them were my big take homes for sudden death.
Yeah, it's a good call out, Jesse. I think this, similar to Phytophthora, has been around long enough that we've got good data on variety tolerance to this, to SDS, and that's good information to look at too. Again, you know your management style, your fields, so be thinking about, if I'm planting beans, typically shooting for the first part of April in North Missouri or something like that, I'm looking for a bean that has good field tolerance to SDS. So. And I'm using a seed treatment, so something to think about. But these kind of late season foliar disease, or these late season fungal diseases like this, can really be some major yield robbers. And we're going to see that this year, I think, in places on some of these beans that, I think from the 30,000 foot level, you expect good beans this year, right? We've had the rains, we've had the growing conditions to put a big crop out there, and then watch all your beans die about 3 weeks before they naturally should senesce is pretty rough. So these are things that we've got to be thinking about earlier in the season. That's why we wanted to hit on it now, just while it's kind of fresh on everybody's mind. You can see it. You can see these things really jump out of the field at you when you're driving around this time of year, for sure. Okay. Nobody else has anything on SDS. I'm going to flip over and we're going to talk about one corn disease. We wanted to cover what we considered emerging diseases, and not necessarily ones that are the biggest yield robbers. There's tons of diseases in corn that we could talk about, but we did want to hit on tar spot real quick. We've been talking about tar spot for 2 or 3 years now, and I think I've done a pretty good job of kind of discussing what it is and how to manage for it and what to look for and those kind of things. However, just commercially, I've noticed that this year, for whatever reason, it kind of hit enough of the majors that they all decided to buy ads and talk about tar spot this year. So I guess we ought to talk about it again as emerging disease. But anyway, I'll flip it over, and I don't know, Scott, you're unmuted. I'll let you kind of talk about tar spot real quick if you want to.
I guess the main things that have happened in the last month or so, we've obviously, it came in fairly early the last 2 years. This year, though, we are really seeing it very heavy, even in fields that have been treated. So I think a lot of the discussion now is I know there's quite a few trials out, for example, that are looking at 2 passes of fungicide, playing with not only some different products and different timings. I'm very interested to see what those look like. I think we've already, Kevin spoke about this, I think, a little bit last year. We've already known that from a plant health standpoint, there is a benefit from that second pass. I think we've maybe had less of a handle on how much that turns into yield, but the direction, and again, and the same thing goes for red crown rot. I mean, we're talking about something that's been on our radar now for 5 or 6 years, and we've only really had the inoculum across a large area for even a shorter period than that. I mean, we're learning a lot about this disease. We do not have a perfect handle on it by any means yet. But again, as Kevin spoke about it last year, if you have corn that has to stand late into the fall, just from harvestability standpoint, standing in the field, we've already known there's a benefit to that second pass. I think we've seen it come in heavy enough now in some fields. We are wondering, is there going to be a yield benefit, and that's where I'm curious about some of these trials that are out there. The other thing, and it seemed like, and again, this is anecdotal, and call me out if you want to, you guys or anybody that listens to this later. I was really posing it to my folks. Are you seeing much of a difference between varieties? Or is the differentiation more between, sprayed and not sprayed, or treated, not treated? And and I've asked that question to a lot of other folks, growers and industry folks, as we're doing these late season plots and all this kind of thing. And, as far as there being a varietal difference that the field needs to be treated or not treated, I don't think we're seeing that. It's looking like fungicide is going to be table stakes for managing tar spot, period, at least for right now. But as you move into how it comes on after that first application, again, very anecdotal, but feeling like we are seeing the variety differences maybe then, as to how they are later in the season, whether it really comes in strong, or it looks like maybe one fungicide pass took care of it. Now, having said that, we're obviously talking about something that can blow in, and there's a lot of factors we're not addressing as we're making these anecdotal observations. But in some cases, you've got plots with a lot of varieties, and you can tell where they start and stop and that kind of thing. So I guess that's the things that I'm looking.
I was just going to jump on that, Scott, real quick, because I guess it's fresh on mine because I saw it 2 days ago. But to this exact point, there is no corn for hybrid that is completely resistant to tar spot. So that does not exist. So make sure we get that out there. However, there is a very noticeable difference in some hybrids' resistance to this, and we saw that this week. Our rep trials are planted 4 rows at a time, and you could vary on the ones that had a high tolerance to tar spot in Kirksville this week. You could very, 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 very clearly see the difference, like by hybrid, where one started and one ended. So it does show. I mean, again, there's tar spot on all of them, so don't get me wrong. I mean, it's just the inoculum is there at this point, but there is a difference.
Were they all treated or not treated?
Not treated.
Oh.
So not treated, but yeah, it's definitely something that, like you said, I think table stakes is treating with fungicide. Like you said, I think it's new enough that we're not sure at this point. When we can say that up into 2024, 2 passes. I've seen probably some data out there that say that doesn't pay, but that was maybe back when we didn't have the inoculum that we do now. So this one is one that's changing fast enough that we can look at that data and make the best decision that we possibly can. But we got to realize the more years we have like this one, where we have, just ubiquitous tar spot out there in every cornfield, the more disease inoculum we have, and probably the closer you get to looking at a 2-pass fungicide option.
Well, yeah, and just to clarify, I mean, I guess what I was saying on the whether it pays or doesn't pay, if corn is standing versus not standing,
that's pretty clear, right?
There's loss involved there too, even
absolutely,
if it doesn't translate into grain fill and all that. But I guess the other thing to talk about tar spot is just the spread. I mean, it's not going to be too long before Shannon gets to start talking about tar spot, it looks like.
Yeah.
Because
we actually already got it this year, Scott. Lawrence County, it was identified 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's one thing we talked about when this thing first came out is, we're probably not going to see it south of, I-70 just because of the way the rains fall. Typically our summers are a little bit drier, but this year, even in a drier summer, there are pockets where it's starting to show up down here. So it's going to be something that I think eventually the whole state's going to be facing.
I was going to say that seemed to be the narrative a handful of years ago when it was in Wisconsin and Northern Illinois, and that, we're like, well, it's got to be, you got to have a heavy dew, cool night in order to make this thing roll. And yeah, here we are, right? So
I'm learning, it adapts to temperatures very quickly. So
Yeah.
like I used to, like Shannon, 2 years ago, if you'd asked me if we'd had tar spot, I said, oh, we get too hot, too dry. Like it ain't never going to happen. And then as we learn about it, it's like, no, it can adjust the temperatures pretty quick and different things.
yeah. Yep. And it loves irrigation. And so,
Yeah, if you haven't looked at it lately, anybody that's listening to this, pull up the Crop Protection Network tar spot map, because it looks a lot different than it did 2 years ago. I mean, we've added several counties down in southwest Missouri or towards southwest Missouri just in the last few weeks. I mean, my folks over on the west side, Ben Schmidt and Sam Viju, they both found it over in that area, not too far from Harrisonville, and it's been found around Warrensburg. It's been found down around Adrian, and I think the last was we were close to Nevada at that point. And when they're finding it, it's not the pictures that have been sent to me. They're the no-brainer pics. Like she's putting them on the map based off of pictures at this point in time, because they're that distinct. It's not the the one little speck that you got to scrape on and try to figure out what it is. It's like you look at it, it's tar spot. And then when they find it, I mean, they're able to find it in multiple fields. So
Yep.
it's down there.
Yep. Guys, any other thoughts on tar spot? I think I'm going to cut us off here. I just looked at a clock from when I turned the record button on, and we've gone plenty long enough, I think, at this point. So I'm going to cut us off on kind of our disease discussion. But any kind of final thoughts on what we talked about today from the handful of diseases we covered? What we anything else from 2024 noteworthy that anybody wants to chime in on real quick?
Yeah, Adam, I was just going to say, I mean, we touched on it, but, we talked about plots and how, thinking about our management strategies when you look at plot data from that standpoint. I think that's pretty critical when we think about tar spot, but even all these seed treatments that we've done. We're getting ready to go into seed selling season. And so, harvest date is going to start becoming out. And I think it's really critical that we think about, hey, where did these plots come from? What did we see? Really thinking about, hey, what diseases did we have this year, and how did we manage that, and how do we maybe have that impact on how we choosing seed from that standpoint, right? And also from the plot side, I mean, just coming from the seed side, just talking from more corn and more soy standpoint, when our disease ratings that are for those are coming, those disease ratings are in plots that are not high managed, so we can make sure we're getting those disease present, so we can see how those varieties react to it, right? Whereas a lot of times when we then go and have a grower plot or just a regular plot, that yield trial plot out there, a lot of times we're managing, have a little bit more high management from that. So understanding how how that plot data and that management style is different has an impact on that as well. And so, I think just having understanding that, again, it's a lot of this is management style. If we talked about it, if you're going to start planting soybeans earlier, like we did, a more robust seed treatment package is probably something that we need to really start looking at and making sure we're doing to help protect us from this, especially as we don't talk about it, I think, near as much, but SCN, soybean cystic nematode, is a huge problem in almost probably every field that we have. And quite honestly, we talked about two diseases today, red crown rot and SDS, that those are kind of the vectors that gets it started from that standpoint. And so, that just has an impact. And so looking at products that can help us from that standpoint is really the only management strategy we have today. So.
No, that's a great call out, Cameron. And one of the reasons that we wanted to cover this time of year right now and not, in February or sometime during the off season is you still have time to go recognize some of these things right now. The plots that Cameron mentioned, that's what I was in this week, an untreated plot where you can really take ratings on corn hybrids and their resistance to tar spot. You know, if you've got crop still in the field, still alive at this point, this is a great time to go around and take a look and be able to see what kind of inoculum we've really got out there before making some of those decisions. And it should guide our decisions. That's being agronomically sound. So great call out. Anybody else got anything? Very, very much appreciate all your all's time this morning, all your insights on all these diseases. Thanks, Cameron, for the teaser and the transition. We are going to, in the next episode or two here, we're going to cover SCN in an entire episode. So we did not just blindly overlook that today. We're kind of holding on to that one to discuss in the future here. So we will be back in a couple weeks and cover one of our other in-season timely topics. And until then, we appreciate everybody listening. And again, appreciate all your all's time this morning. We'll talk to you next time.
Happy birthday, Cameron.
Oh, yeah, we forgot. Dang it.
Happy birthday to you.
Good.